Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I don't know how many of you are out there, so can you please sort of like say something? We'll see your comments, but we can't see you. My name is Ayo Johnson, and I'm here facilitating a conversation, which is really a community conversation, featuring key people within the Department of Education about Bermuda and global studies. I want to say that this is actually the brainchild of Mrs. Kalmar Richards. We do plan to do a series of webinars and podcasts, which we plan sort of for around the start of the new school year. Mrs. Richards, who will explain her reasoning, decided we need to do something on this particular subject now. I'm going to let everybody. Oh, before I do that, I should say though, everybody knows me as an independent journalist. I am a journalist. This is not an independent journalism project because I have been engaged by the Department of Education to provide communication advice. But I do hope that I do plan on having this as authentic a conversation as possible. So we haven't had any sort of like slick rehearsals where we're entirely scripted. And of course, your questions, you in the audience, will also help keep this conversation as real and as authentic as it's going to get. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Mrs. Richards to give her own self-intro.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our conversation about Bermuda and global studies. We're delighted you're taking some time to do so. As Mr. Johnson said, I'm Kalmar Richards. I am a Bermudian educator. I began my career teaching at the Berkeley Institute. I then became a mentor teacher for the Bermuda public school system. After that, I served as a primary school principal, was seconded to go to the Cedar Bridge Academy as a deputy principal, took over as the principal of Cedar Bridge Academy, and presently I am serving as the Commissioner of Education, responsible for strategic leadership for the Department of Education and Bermuda Public Schools. Today, we felt it was necessary to come and to have the conversation around Bermuda and global studies. Here recently, there has been a renewed interest and passion about what is happening with social studies in our Bermuda schools, in our public schools. There have been questions around, do we really teach social studies? Or if we do we have the Black studies or African studies or Caribbean studies? What is happening with social studies in Bermuda public schools? And so today our aim is to really share with you and to give you some insights about our curriculum, what is taught at various levels. And we hope that by the end of this time, your time with us, by the end of this conversation, that you will leave having some greater insights about what is actually taught in Bermuda public schools.
Great. Dr. Simmons, what's your story?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I have been in education since 1984. I started out as a homeschool counselor, then I became a guidance counselor, left the guidance counseling, and then went into the classroom as a social studies teacher, all at the high school level, saying secondary school. Left there after 11 years, studied abroad, went into higher education as an assistant professor at the Miami University of Ohio, the University of Dayton, Howard University. I'm back home serving my people after some 30 plus years now in education. I'm one of those people who believe and take on the philosophy of Malcolm X around history and social studies. That is, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward all research. And I don't care what discipline that you are in, meaning that in social studies, there are at least 6, 7 interdisciplinary subjects. History is the root of those disciplines. So I'm excited about this opportunity that we have here today because it opens up a window of opportunity for us to have a conversation with the Bermudian public about education and not just social studies.
Excellent. Miss Miss Grant,
Nicole
Mrs.
Grant.
Grant, how are you? Sorry, I keep doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Um,
Good day, community at large. I am honored to be here this afternoon to share with you what we have to offer in our public school education system with regards to social studies. I've been an educator here for the past 24 years. My experience ranges from teaching at the middle and senior level, social studies in particular. I've been a mentor teacher. That means I actually coached and supported new teachers. I've been an active deputy at the middle school. And presently, I am the education officer for social studies at the Department of Education, serving 2 years as of last month. As we discuss Bermuda and global studies, it's my hope that you leave here today knowing that Bermuda is at the forefront of our social studies curriculum, as well as infusing global studies as we move through from P1 right through to S4. It is knowing that history is forever evolving, knowing that we will be making changes in the upcoming years to ensure that our students are equipped with 22nd century skills that involves social studies. So again, welcome, and we hope that you are truly enriched during this afternoon's program.
and Miss Hodip.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nikisha Hodip. I am the Special Projects Officer for Social Studies, currently working at the Department of Education. I've been a classroom teacher for 12 years, working from primary 2 to primary 6, and I've been a teacher leader for social studies for over 6 years. And the one thing that I would really like to impress upon those of you who are with us today and those who will hear this message later is that social studies is a critical subject, just like English, math, science, and as was shared, it really underpins the developments even in those areas. So we really need the continued support of parents, communities, and community partners to continue the investment and support what is taught in the classroom.
Great. So I guess we should probably start. A lot of people have been talking about their, the curriculum. What's in the curriculum? A few questions have come in about what is actually in the curriculum. But I think the first point of departure actually should really be how important, Mrs. Richards, is social studies in the whole scheme of things. I mean, you're the head of the entire department. So, from your vantage point, what role does it play, whether it's within the whole strategic plan or education as a whole, etc. Public education. What's your perspective on that?
Well, social studies is extremely important, and so we consider it as one of our core courses. You would have heard Mrs. Hodip indicate that social studies is as important as English and mathematics and science. So we believe it is extremely important. It is a core course. It's given significant time in the school schedule, in the master schedules, right from P1 to S4. And so we want to underscore with the community, particularly those who are questioning whether we do teach it or is it of value? It is of tremendous value to us. And in just a few moments, you're going to hear about the extent of the curriculum offerings from P1, right to S4. And so social studies plays a critical role in helping our young people not only to know about who they are, but their history and the part that our forefathers have played and the part that they have the potential to play moving forward.
Great. And Dr. Simmons, you in your remarks, you talked about the foundational nature of history. I'm probably, messing it up right now, but I see that you thought that history was actually the sort of root discipline. Tell us.
Yes.
Yeah.
For social studies, it is. And
Okay.
you're talking about psychology, you're talking about anthropology, you're talking about political science. These are used economics. These are the disciplines that are interdisciplinary disciplines social studies. If you were teaching any of those disciplines, well, like I said, history is the root. Geography is very much a part of social studies.
Okay.
So we want to understand that whenever we're talking about social studies, we're talking about the issues and the inquiry that is based in social studies
Now,
and the
when
disciplines across
yeah,
the field.
so when we talk about Bermuda and global studies,
Hmm.
we say so. What it really means is Bermuda studies and global studies, correct? So what does that really mean? Break down, especially the studies part of it. What is that? Just as an overview, what does that really mean?
Well, of course, I take the position as someone in terms of history and background, you always begin with your place first. So let's say Bermuda. As a former teacher of social studies and history, I always begin with, who are you? Bermuda study. I'm teaching Bermuda studies. Who are you? Who are you going out into the world? So if I want to talk about Bermuda studies, I always begin there first. Who are we?
Okay.
Right? And yes, you can begin and talk about, the settling of Bermuda and all of that, but I always begin with the person. So I, as a Black individual, who am I? I can break it down in terms of who I am, my name, the origin, my ancestry, where they come from. Let's begin there first, going out into the world. So I can make those connections to my St. Kitts and Nevis roots and make connections back to the African continent. And then I'm coming back out of what came out of Africa that brought my people here.
Okay.
So
So
I
so
think of it in that context in terms of Bermuda studies. So I began in Bermuda, and you heard the connection with the rest of the globe.
oh, gotcha. Okay.
You got me?
Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's really important given the public dialogue um, around education and this particular specific area, that we actually get people to know what is in the curriculum. That thing called Bermuda and Global Studies. So I want to start with, because I understand that Miss Holdip has um, been sort of can give us the overview on the sort of the early years. So let's start with the early years. And you did send me a slide or two, I think. So we can, I'll find that, and you can get started. So what happens, in the primary years, Miss Holden?
Okay, so the way that Dr. Simmons communicated it is exactly the way that it occurs. So in the early years, what we do is we focus on um, building up students' identity to Bermuda as Bermudians themselves or having connections to Bermuda, because we do appreciate that we have some students in our system who have parents that are not Bermudian, but what we do is we trace that connection as well. So we look at the Bermuda Social Studies curriculum from a rooted Bermudian context. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so students are taught Bermuda history spanning from 1503 to current day overall. That's more so from the upper grades, but at the lower grades, we teach it reflecting African Bermudian, European Bermudian experiences, inclusive of Native American and Portuguese references. So you have a slide up here. And what we do is we start with the students. So where are you in a school unit, in a family unit? And we can look at that from a cultural perspective as well, from a neighborhood, from a community reference. And that too is also looked at from a cultural reference. So that way the students see themselves in social studies. So they're learning through the analysis of their family unit, of the school environment, of the neighborhood, and of the community itself. And so at the primary two level, you can see it's very explicitly stated that we look at the early cultures through food, through music, through dance, through various avenues, because this is what the students are living. And so they're understanding the background to what it is that they're living. So when they look at a Gombe, understand the cultural references attached to that particular cultural symbol. When they're eating peas and rice, or rice and peas, or codfish and potatoes, they're understanding where these foods came from and why they're a part of our Bermudian culture. So we use the connections and reflections not only to teach content, but allow students to see themselves as a part of Bermuda's social cultural fabric. That's really, really important, that they see themselves reflected in the curriculum and understand how this all came to be. Yeah. And so if you look at the primary threes, it goes even farther to look at our traditions as far as our holidays are concerned, our celebratory activities. So these didn't just pop out of nowhere. These have national and cultural associations. So when we talk about Emancipation Day, and now we have our newly married Prince Day, they understand, okay, well, Mary Prince was an icon in the emancipation movement. And so this makes sense to connect her to Emancipation Day and the things that she did in her role with the abolition movement. And so, again, our students understand that social studies is life. It's not just something that's on paper. It's not just something that we study. It's something that we live. Yeah. And so that's our society and culture module, if you will. And that's where Dr. Simmons said, when you start to talk about economics, when you talk about geography, when you talk about politics and law, those are other modules that students are exposed to. And so in their learning, they understand that Bermuda history is a part of global history. They understand about the global events that led to Bermuda's discovery and settlement. But they also understand about the international relationships Bermuda forged and the global events that were involved in bringing and developing Bermuda to what we currently have. So they start in the upper grades of looking at Bermuda's global involvement through war history, starting in 1775 at the Gunpowder Plot, up to the most recent tragedy of September 11. And they understand the social, the political, and the economic impact that these events had, these historical events had on Bermuda. We look at
and does this happen
politics.
at
Sure.
the primary level?
Yes.
Okay. So what you said something about this is a module. What module is this? Are we looking at?
So this module is called Society and Culture.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And from P1 to P5, a kid would have gone through P5 and would know about the friendly societies. Paulu. Wow.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. So when you
Wow.
look at P4, we go back to our 1503 beginning, if you will. And this coincides, so when we talk about our space and our place on the global map, we're looking at where was Bermuda, what was happening during the age of discovery, the age of exploration. And so Bermuda is right in there, yeah, as being involved in that. You had the European explorers, and so one day Bermuda, as being one of those European explorers, happened to come across Bermuda. He communicated that information back to someone back in Europe, and then we were officially placed on the map. So these are conversations, yes, that we are having at the P4 level, so students understand that we played a role in global history. At that time, it was breaking news. You have Columbus, you have Magellan, you have Vasco da Gama. Now, these are the names that we have, but it's also opportunity for teachers to take the lens a little wider, and they can, talk about the fact that there were other events going on at this time, but this is the focus that led to Bermuda's development. Yeah, there was traffic on the ocean, if you will. And so, as you saw on P5, that's where we start to get into. Now, what were the ramifications of that traffic, if you will? Because now that means that we were, again, because we're on the global stage, we were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. We were involved in human trafficking, Bermuda, yeah, in its early colonial history, yeah. And so it does transition into P6 in that we talk about our experience, or the slave experience, emancipation experience in P5, and then when they get to P6, then they start to look at the emancipated experience, moving into desegregation movements, and so it's a continuum of Bermuda history that has strong African, Bermudian, and European connections. So those two run in tandem, and that's just for that's just for society and culture. So as I said, we do have the politics and law module.
Okay.
And so that's where students understand rules, rights, responsibilities, rules at the lower grade. So again, we're starting with the young learner. So they're understanding, oh, I have a role in a school, just like I have a role at home. And when they get to the upper grades, they then understand I have a role in society. And with those roles comes rights and responsibilities. And in institutions, there are rules, right? But in society, we have laws. Yeah. And so they understand how these locales run into each other and how you have preparation as a young person and as you get older into becoming a citizen where you can vote. And now you're going to use your right and your responsibility as a citizen to vote and how that affects change. So they study the various socio-political movements in Bermuda that's impacted Bermuda through gender. We talk about the women's suffragette movement through franchise. So that's where we talk about the Committee for Universal Adult Suffrage. We talk about the conception of the Union, right? And coming from BWA, and we talk about the racial lands of the movements in society.
Right.
And so you're going to see names. They're going to see names like Dr. E.F. Gordon, Paulo Carcamafego, Gladys Morale. They're going to see these names of Bermudians that have made advancements.
Yeah, I want to come back to you, but I want to go to Mrs. Grant to ask her to, well, first of all, just one thing I've learned about communications is that certain things need to be repeated, okay? So what I heard you say, Mrs. Hodip, is that there are several modules that make up this thing called Bermuda Global Studies. And children are involved from P1 right through. So I'd like Mrs. Grant to sort of give us that overview again in terms of what those modules are, because I think people should understand the structure of things, and then maybe talk a bit more in terms of specifics as to what's going on in the more senior levels, because Ms. Hodip talks about a little bit about the primary levels. And I know the curriculum is quite involved. We're going to spend hours if we're going to go through every single detail. So I don't want us to do that. But can you give us an insight into, first of all, those modules again, and also the senior levels? Mrs. Grant?
Sure. So Nikisha covered the politics and law and society and culture. Those are two modules and or units that is covered in the primary 1 through 6, as well as the M1 through M3. We also speak about the economy, and as Nikisha mentioned, we talk about the hog penny with regards to money, even though it's talked about at the primary level with regards to coins and things of that nature, but we do extend our students' learning on Bermuda history, i.e. through the hog penny. Once we move to the middle school, we actually continue with Bermuda and Global Studies, and you will see that it's somewhat of a repeat, but more of a repeat to an extension of the studies that happen at the primary level. So the M1 curriculum, it dives into the branches of geography, connecting Bermuda, which is the hub, to the Caribbean as well as Africa. We look at the physical, the economical, and the history, the human geography. And the students actually identify in more detail the parishes, the landmarks, knowing that this is also covered at the P1, P2, P3 level. So often the community says, well, they don't know the parishes. Keep in mind, community, that this is actually in the curriculum and we know that it's taught. I would encourage you to also explore with your own children with regards to parishes and landmarks, because we are a group that work together, meaning parents as well as teachers, to hone in into those basic geography skills to ensure that they're transferable across all of the courses offered in the school system, as well as from P1 right through to S4. At the M1 level, we also talk about ancient civilizations, and normally this is at the end of the school year, and students are exposed to ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, ancient Greece. Ancient Egypt is a good transition into our M2 curriculum, as well as the ancient Greece and Rome, because we touch on European history as well as Bermuda history. Bermuda history in particular, we talk about the African kingdoms, the wealth that was exhibited in Africa prior to the transatlantic slave trade. You may note that here of late, there has been an ebook that has been put together by educators in the Bermuda public system, as well as the private system, along with the National Museum of Bermuda, that speaks to the transatlantic slave trade, which has been well received by the community and the teachers that have been involved in some of the webinars. So to continue with the M2 curriculum, they are aware of the human trafficking and the inhumane experiences by our African people. But not only that, they experience the likelihoods of Mary Prince and Sally Bassett, knowing that there are monuments and or research there that can expose them to greater heights in their knowledge with regard to those two individuals. Moving on to M3. The M3, again, Bermuda-based, but we filter out to learning about colonialism. What does that mean with regards to the global perspective? We look at Britain, the impact it had on the colonies. We talk about mercantilism at large. We also talk about Africa and the Caribbean with regards to their colonial aspect and their leaders and how they also looked at becoming independent in some of those countries in the Caribbean and over in Africa. And finally, of course, we talk about our economy, which focuses on tourism and international business. We've linked with ABIC in the last 3 to 4 years to talk about how we can actually hone in on that economy to ensure that our people, our students, are well aware of what is offered in our community for their careers. Moving on to senior school. Senior school, again, Bermuda-based, global-based. The difference is that we are competing with other subjects at the senior level for graduation as well as for entry to college. So we have the ELA, which is English Language Arts. We have some math that are offered, I believe, for a 3 to 4 year period. But because of the competition with those other subjects, we basically are required to have students do 2 credits, which means Bermuda Studies offered at the S3 level, that is mandatory. And we also have either History, IGCSE, Geography, IGCSE, or Global Perspectives, which is a new course, IGCSE, offered at the S1 level. There are other subjects and electives that are offered at the senior level, that is Introduction to Africa, Preserving Our Heritage, which talks about Bermuda, and delves into presentations to the community by the students. And for the most part, the other courses offered speak to religion and things of that nature. So ultimately, we touch on who we are as a people. Our students should be able to identify what is offered in Bermuda as far as culturally based, heritage based, traditional based. We also talk about the African Diaspora Heritage Trail. We have been involved in movements with regards to visiting the sites. We have linked with the Titan bus tours. They've taken the City Bridge Academy students out on tours in the last 2 years to expose them to what we have to offer with regard to the Diaspora Trail. So in a nutshell, we are doing, I think, an exceptional job of infusing our Bermuda history, as well as exposing our young people to what we have to offer as a country, with the hopes that they'll move on to becoming greater citizens and want to empower themselves to give back to our community.
Wonderful. So I'm curious as to what, where does, oh, sorry, hang on. Trying to get used to this technology. Oh, there you all are. I'm not seeing too many comments from our audience. We have somebody said hello quite a while ago. There is a bit of a lag here, as I explained to you all before. So maybe they have made comments, but we haven't yet seen them. Now, the question for me sometimes, and I think this is really the crux of the matter when it comes to, when we consider presence of Africa in an education system in Bermuda. For me, it's like, we're living in a society that's a colony. The majority of the children in public school are descended from people who were trafficked and enslaved, and their presence here was to serve, massive financial interests. There was no interest in seeing them as individuals, obviously. So, and I know this is contentious. This country is divided racially and politically and all that, but I think one thing we can agree on as a community is that the legacy of all that has adversely affected our children, adversely affected society, I would argue, but the impact on black children has been, black people, the descendants of those who were enslaved, has for the most part not been that beneficial, and we're living with that legacy today. So I wondered, my question is really in two parts, but you know what, I'll go with the first part first. I think the question is, as black educators, does that legacy, and you've inherited a system, that 50, 100 years ago would have been to preserve that sort of status quo of inequality and inequities, etc. As educators and as black educators, does that legacy make things a bit more complex, a bit more urgent for you, or is education just education? I don't know if you understand my question, but that's the best I can do without having making a sort of long speech. So anybody can go for that one.
I'm being patient. I want one of the ladies go. I can say a lot about this one. But,
okay, but I think it's already 1 o'clock, so I'll give. Yeah, let's do 2 minutes each.
To demystify some of your statement.
Yeah.
First, recognizing our origin as people of African descent on this side of the planet. Certainly, yes, we can talk about the transatlantic slave trade, all of that there. But as a black educator in Bermuda, and understanding the role that colonized education has played on our psyche in Bermuda, we have an obligation to decolonize school curriculum. All right. And I think this is part of the conversation that we have engendered here, that we're putting that on the table with our social studies. Earlier the statement was made that is always evolving, is always changing. And both, Nicole and Nikisha are very much on point, because we have to do a lot of self-reflection. Yeah. So when we look at our current circumstances, and the evolution of us, look at in this panel, all of us were schooled here in Bermuda in our early formative years, right? We've had somewhat comparable and different experiences schooled here in Bermuda. Yeah. And which means that we are always in a position, colony or any education system, engaging in some form of self-reflection about what you were taught and how you were taught. I could talk to, my primary and high school experiences in the classroom and what I was taught, and the colonial trappings of it was all there. But at the same time, I was learning history of the role of the Vikings and all of that there. And in the curricula, there was nothing explicit talking about African origins in my era of schooling. However, I came out of and was a part of a community social experience that what the school didn't do, it was already in my household. It was already a part maybe of the church community, the club communities, where we were exposed to literature, books that taught us about Imhotep, the destruction of black civilization, Chancellor Williams. These are books that I was exposed to in high school. But again, because the curricula didn't talk about it in that day, we were of a community that exposed us to it. Very much in the same way, to some degree, we're having this discussion and the issue of black studies because of the Black Lives Matter movement and what they're bringing to the surface in terms of looking at education and decolonizing. That's something that we have to do in Bermuda.
Yeah.
So
So
it's an ongoing discussion for us. And like I said, I applaud the fact that we're having this dialogue, this conversation. It'll stretch a community conversation, not just to talk, but for
right.
people to get involved with what we ask to improve the quality of education as a whole.
Yeah. So, Ms. Hodip, you were going to say something. Can you recall your thoughts? And
Yes, I can. I was going to say, speaking from the primary level, as I mentioned, when we teach society and culture, you heard very clearly what is in black and white print.
yeah.
And so teaching history and teaching history properly, teaching history to respect all voices, teaching history in a balanced manner that you explore the good, the bad, and the ugly, allows for a clear conversation. And the youngest of them all, they get it. And so, when we look at the politics of how we came to be, even when we look at the economics, it's not just about, the dollar and cents, but we talk about the intersectionality of economics, of politics, and of race. And that's through the Tuckerstown dispute. That is a case study of
When
that.
did they learn
so
that? When did
I'm
they learn
sorry?
about Tuckerstown?
So Tuckerstown is in P6. So it was on the
Okay.
slide that you had shown.
Right.
And so that is a huge piece. Even when we look at tourism and the colorism of tourism, the racialized tourism and how that evolved. We talk about that. We talk about international business, and how that came about. So when we teach what is in black and white, and I've been teaching for 12 years, 12, 13 years, it's there, but we have to ensure that we're teaching it properly. And as a black educator, I can say that I've taught it from the last day the same way I've taught it from the first day.
Yeah.
It's in black and white. But there's a huge point that Dr. Simmons said, and I was in a webinar earlier, and a parent made this point. I also had a background where my family taught me about my history. And half of my immediate family, my nuclear family, is not Bermudian. They're Caribbean. And so having those conversations, again, allowed me to understand, how do I fit into this Bermuda picture, both locally, because half of me is Bermudian, and globally, because of the other half. But even how does that connect? Because of the way the slaves were brought up from the Caribbean and the waves that we had into Bermuda. So when it came to approaching the content, I had that background. And this parent that was in the webinar said that she believes that's her duty. My parents thought that it was their duty. So that means that children are now coming to school prepared to engage the conversation. And so I would say, as an educator, we continue to encourage our parents to have those conversations when we have our parent-teachers conferences and we're going through the standards, what their child would have learned. And that was my practice as a professional, and I'm certain that there are others like me, that we just continue to encourage parents, communities to continue or to restart those conversations.
Yeah.
It takes a village to raise a child.
Is that happening though? In your view, is that happening a lot? Or were your experiences sort of like abnormal? That community parental
Considering
support.
my background, where I grew up, I would say I wasn't the only one. You know what? I'm a brown porn dog. So no, for me, I was not the only one. However, I do appreciate, and this has been confirmed, and I don't want to get too preachy into the research, but it does talk about the further away the generations are from the sentiment of the elders, that it does get diluted. And that's why I do call upon communities to restart those conversations. I know Pembroke East, those conversations are still alive, but there are other areas that need to restart those. If you're living in Warwick next to Cobbs Hill, you need to have those conversations. If you're living in Dockyard, Somerset area, Sands, Parish, you need to have those conversations, because the Black community built the Dockyard, St. George's. Those conversations need to be held again. There's a place for it still, and we're doing our best through the curriculum. But just to hear parents that are engaging in this work talk about how their children are enjoying social studies, it shows that they've been primed, and we need to do that. Just like we do,
Right.
again, with the reading, just like we do with the numeracy.
Yeah,
We
Nicole
need to
Grant.
prime
Sorry, Miss
this.
Richards, were you going to say something?
Yes, yes, I was. I was going to underscore the importance of parents engaging with children around the social studies curricula. And so, yes, teachers will do their part in the school, but what children are learning and what they need to take that home. And so there are opportunities for parents to engage in very stimulating conversations with their children, not just once in a while, but I'd like to think that it would be a part of what they're doing, every day or at least on a regular basis within their immediate family, within their extended family, because I too can recall the conversations with my parents, with my grandparents, and then at family gatherings. And so that's one way that we can sort of keep the conversation alive. I think the other piece that I would want to underscore here is the need for both us as educators and also as parents to help our children to feel really good about who they are, and what we've endured and what we have come through, and helping children to feel, good about who they are, accepting who they are, and helping them to become strong and confident. We know the connections and the correlation with taking risk as a learner, etc. But the opportunities exist for the schools and the parents to become really strong partners in ensuring that these conversations just become a part of what we do, in the home, around the table, sitting off at events at your home, when you're driving about. So it should just become integrated into the fabric of what we do.
Nicole Grant, you're when the two of you spoke about the curriculum, I didn't hear anything about that great discoverer of the New World, the one who sailed off and Christopher Columbus. What happened there?
Well,
You
let me
written him out of
digress.
history, have you?
Let me digress, first of all, to the conversation that was just held to elaborate that first and foremost, as Black educators, we need to equip ourselves with the knowledge, meaning that once we enter into those doors as educators, it does not stop there. We should be evolving as we continue to see that there is new history, if that sort of thing, or there's history that is actually being brought to our attention on a daily basis. An example
Yeah.
was last evening with Dr. Clarence Maxwell's webinar via the National Museum of Bermuda. And when he spoke, much of what he shared is in our curriculum. I have the community to know, which was great to hear. But also there are some new learning there. And so as educators, we have to continuously hone in on those types of webinars and expose ourselves to anything that comes forward in our presence to ensure that we are able to now deliver that to our young people to empower them as well. So I would say it's in an equation. It's parent, teacher, student, which brings a wealth of knowledge to who we are as a people. With regards to the explorers.
Chris Columbus.
So, Chris Columbus, he is mentioned at the upper primary school level, and mentioned in the sense that he is an explorer. He did travel the seas. He is not looked upon as being the end all be all in the curriculum. How it's delivered depends on the actual teacher. But from perspective at the Department of Education representation, such as Nikisha Hodip and myself, we know for sure that he is not the end all be all. We know that he is one of the many explorers. He is also an individual that you can view him in a negative or positive, depending on who the person is. We as educators should be ensuring that we are educating our young people of both sides. He actually slaughtered our people. There was many things that he did to ensure that we did not progress. But at the same time, yes, he is saluted in many other parts of the world as being one of the great explorers. So with regards to when and where he's mentioned at the primary level. We talk about him as well at the M2 level. And again, depending on who's in front of the students, we will hope that they're giving both sides. But we are very much open to ensuring that they hear about explorers because they do have their importance and place, but again, from whose perspective.
I like to add something to that because that is important.
Yeah.
But what goes with this too, I mean, and I'm just reflecting having taught that, it's important to teach our children how to question, how to think.
Absolutely.
And that particular module and lesson, when I'm reflective of it, was always a favorite of mine, because I had to teach students how to think. I always used to ask them the question: if he landed somewhere and found people there, did he discover it? Let's begin, and so it was, the questioning is always important. And Nicole was speaking to the fact that, how people presented, how teachers presented, you want to create balance. All of those things are important, but the balance is in the questioning.
Right.
And that's one of the other beautiful things about social studies. We are discussing issues, and if you're discussing issues, you're discussing issues and teaching people how to think, not what to think, how to think. So I wanted to place some emphasis on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be a complete failure then in that classroom, because, I mean, as Nicole Grant described him as a murderer. That's it for me. He's not, not that important. But I know you wouldn't give me high marks for that, so I'm going to leave that alone. So
well, I think we just need to ensure that there's a balance, right? So there's always two sides to a story, and
there's more than two sides. There's much more than two sides, correct?
Yeah. But we need to ensure that we are exposing them to not just one part of the story.
Okay.
Now there's a comment here, Mr. Johnson, by Miss Carmen Mitchell-Jones. If I can speak to that.
Yeah, I was gonna. Let me just acknowledge the audience first. There's been a few comments. Most of them acknowledge the position that Dr. Simmons took about the role of parents, and they said, yes, that's absolutely true. Another comment has come about, the history of your family, of your people, starts at home with your family, storytelling, readings, etc., and should be expanded at school in a factual context. Thanks for that, Karen Edwards Simmons. Everybody's agreeing with you, Doc. I think that when
I want some pushback too.
Yeah, we need some challenge here. Tell us all lives matter. We'll deal with that. I think that when teaching students, their background have to be taken into consideration, there should never be a time when children don't see themselves. Some of this starts at home. So the general agreement with sort of what we're saying, part of what's been said. Carmen Mitchell-Jones is saying we need to consider the non-Black, non-Bermudan teachers that are teaching our students as well. If they don't have a sense of our Bermudan culture and heritage, our children can suffer. Now, I'm glad I kept that on the screen, because, I really want to hone in on this. The issue of performance in the classroom, how we manage that, how we ensure that whether you're Black, Bermudian, or not, if you're in the classroom teaching in the public school system, you got to have a certain level of competence, whether it's cultural, academic, all of these things combined. Am I wrong, Mrs. Richards?
Well, Mr. Johnson, I was thinking as you were making your comments that we can have the curriculum, but we have to ensure that teachers are teaching the curriculum. And so when we consider that the principals are the instructional leaders in schools, and so part of the process that is required on an ongoing, and I would say a daily basis, is for the instructional leader / principal to go out into the classrooms where I would say where the service is being delivered by our teachers, and to watch the delivery, to listen to what is being delivered. So it involves, going out, going in, observing, you're scripting, you're taking some notes, you're looking at not only how the curriculum is being delivered, but you're actually looking at the content, etc., and you come back and you just compare that, you calibrate it against what is supposed to be taught to ensure that the curriculum is indeed being delivered, because that is a critical piece. So I would underscore, we have the curriculum, and it is rich, it is evolving, it is improving, and we're very pleased about that. But the delivery of it depends on teachers in the classroom and
That's where the
taking
rubber.
that curriculum, bringing it to life, and for our instructional leaders, our principals, ensuring that that is indeed taking place.
Right. Now, Nicole Grant, you had a comment about Carmen Mitchell-Jones's comment. Can you speak specifically to what she's saying? Two things. Number one, we got some people who are foreigners teaching our students. And if they don't have a sense of our Bermudian culture and heritage, our children can suffer. What's your
So
take
I will
on
go
it?
back to basically equipping themselves with our culture and what we have to offer as a people. Again, getting involved with the webinars that's offered, having conversations with other Bermudian teachers, also exploring Bermuda. I'm not saying that only Blacks are non-Bermudians, but for the most part, if you don't know, as an educator, it is your duty to equip yourself with what you have to teach. You can also have things like guest speakers to come in if you feel uncomfortable we're being very, very real here as far as if there's an uncomfortable space for individual teacher, you find other people that can speak about that particular topic and at the same time educate yourself so you're listening in as well.
Does a teacher have that kind of flexibility?
Most definitely. And if you want to, I would say flexibility as far as, yes, you have guest speakers, you have presenters, you have field trips, you have a conglomerate of ways to equip yourself to better support your delivery of instruction in the classroom.
There's something else to add to this here, and I think it's the Department of Education or Ministry of Education responsibility. And I'm going to give an example in terms of non-Bermudian teachers, Bermudian teachers. When I would teach in United States, for example, in Washington, D.C., in a school system, it was required of me to go through an orientation on the history of Washington, D.C., and the role that it has in those students' lives. When I went to Ohio, I had to do the same thing, right? And so I'm saying, as a part of our orientation for every teacher who's coming in, let's start with the question of non-Bermudian teachers. As a part of their orientation, to me, it should be an expectation that's a part of their orientation, that they go through a cultural orientation. Here are things related to Bermuda that you must know. Now, I'm going to say this.
But you're the man who calls the shots. When is that going to, does it happen? And if not, when?
It does happen. It does happen because with the new teacher orientation, they do the Bermudian culture piece. Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you said we need to do that.
Now I'm calling the shots on this here because we have a population, a 98% Black student population. And this is for Black Lives Matter, Black Power movement, whomever, right? Majority of Bermuda's teachers are Black teachers.
Yeah.
This is our challenge.
Yeah.
I think Nicole and Nikisha brought it up. It is a responsibility of our teachers to equip themselves, to reinforce themselves with the knowledge and skills. What you don't know, you ask. What you need to know, you demand. And I think we have a responsibility of our people. You see, we can't say like they say in America, in England, in Canada, or predominantly white education system teachers that those teachers are predominantly white. They don't teach our children. We can't position ourselves to say this.
Yeah.
Although it does occur.
Okay.
Because I would venture to say the great majority of our teachers, in terms of understanding and knowing Bermuda history, race identity, all those things, do not bring that out in their discourse in the classroom that Nicole spoke to and that Nikisha spoke to earlier.
I think what I would add here, Dr. Simmons, is, and underscore what you've said and what Mrs. Grant has said about the importance of teachers ensuring that they continue to equip themselves with the skills, making sure they stay abreast of the content, and that's the teacher responsibility. But the department has a responsibility as well. We have a responsibility to ensure that we engage teachers in ongoing professional development. So it's this dual responsibility to keep, the saw sharp, to keep teachers abreast. So, working in tandem to ensure that they're at their very best with their skills, with their knowledge as they prepare to deliver in the classroom. So equipping, and then, of course, going back to that piece again, where you have to go in. I mean, Officer Grant goes into the classroom. She will go in, she will observe, she will listen, she will give feedback to the principal to share with the teacher. And there will be things around, okay, yes, there may have been some things that are done well, but here are some things where the teacher needs to improve. And then as a leader in the building, you go back in again to see that the teacher has indeed implemented those things that were identified for improvement. And that's how we keep excellence, in our classrooms and how we promote it.
Great. So
I would agree, Ms. Richards. Just very briefly, Mr. Johnson, I would agree that there are teachers that are well equipped with regards to what Bermuda has to offer as a country, the history, the culture, the traditions. And when Nakisha and I do speak and meet with teachers, that is evident. But what we are sharing, which I think you underscored as well, and Dr. Simmons, if you do not know, we are here to support you. We are here to help find the resources that you may not have. So there should be very few students that are leaving our education system not knowing who they are as a people, because I think we have just a resourceful group that can support teachers. We have teacher leaders as well on site that are also responsible for ensuring that teachers are equipped with what they need for the specific subjects. And so it is a team effort between the Department of Education, the principals, the teacher leaders, and I think with the groups that I've mentioned, we will definitely be able to ensure that our young people are leaving with better knowledge, understanding of who they are once they leave the system.
Okay, now I got to ask all of you, because it's 1 minute to 1:30 and we'd said 1 hour. But can we go another 12 minutes? Because there's some very profound comments and questions being asked here. And I would like to be able to acknowledge them and sort of let's briefly take them. But before we go to those, in terms of professional development, and there's a two-sided responsibility here, the department and the professional in the classroom, okay? But both of these parties are dealing with materials that, traditionally may not have been created to tell, for the kind of empowering education that we are all sort of striving for. Okay, and I'm talking about the fact that there's history books that have been written that has treated the black population as invisible or merely, happy Negroes who are very proud to serve. How do we ensure that the type of materials that is informing the professional development is actually appropriate? What are the processes that we go through to say, well, this is a textbook that you can learn from, we can teach in our classrooms? How does that work? Quality control, I guess I'm asking about. Doc, you got an answer for me?
State the question again, please. in a
concise way.
Yeah.
Well, and also, Mr. Johnson, I think what would be important to share here, and maybe either Mrs. Hodip or Mrs. Grant can respond, they are involved in upgrading and revising the curriculum, and with that, they are upgrading and revising the resources so that they are current, so that they are accurate. So let's give them an opportunity to respond to what they're doing and what they do to ensure that, for want of a better term, that accurate resources are being
I mean, just quality control, basically. Somebody writes a book, is Bermudian, is black, Afrocentric, do you just put in a school, in a classroom?
Well, no, I mean, here's the issue, one of the issues, because we want quality, and that's the earlier word we were speaking, quality. There are a number of our people, authors, we collect all Bermuda author books, for example. They are different ranges in quality that speaks to the culture, the history, and all of that. But we want quality. And I do believe we have a responsibility to assist our public who are doing it as we also encourage our public, meaning teachers, all of us, to do more of it. I don't believe that enough of us really produce what we say we
There's
want.
not a lot out there. There's not a lot out there.
There isn't. There isn't.
Yeah.
And the point is well taken. I just finished a scholarship committee, and interestingly, all the candidates, they were expected to research some of the legends who the scholarships were named after. We had 8 candidates. All 8 could not find, this is in Bermuda, they
Right.
could not find any bio, any in-depth description of the candidates. And I said, wow, we can't blame the young people for this. That's an education responsibility that we have. The department can say certain things. So I'm saying, when I think of, I have my social studies teachers here, my language arts teachers there, we have an obligation. Students, we need 10 bios of our top 10 athletes or historians or elders. I think every Bermudian child, as an assignment, should have the responsibility in their neighborhood, because we have them in Bermuda, where they interview.
Yeah.
They interview them. And I say they interview. They're not just what's in writing. They're producing the essay, but they learn. They photograph. They take that video.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to put this up and film everything else that's negative. I'm saying put this in the hands of children who's interviewing Mrs. Richards or whomever, and getting
their own
story.
grandparents.
Or grandparents.
Absolutely.
And grandparents.
Absolutely.
Now, we will produce in a school year, I would guarantee it, if we required all 5,000 or 4,000 plus students, right? You imagine the anthology of work that we would have produced coming from our children who have interviewed their elders, their parents, this person. So those are the type of things that we have to do, and it's not just restricted to social studies. That's a responsibility across all disciplines in an assignment.
Yeah, Ms. Hodip.
That speaks to that question.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically we've entered into the standards-based grading era, and we have proficiency scales that have been produced, and those have been immensely supportive of social studies instruction.
Can you break it down though? What does that mean? What is standards-based grading?
Standards-based grading. Okay, Ms. Richards, would you like to speak to that? And I'll pick it up.
In a nutshell and in a simple form, the system introduced standards to standards-based grading to enable us, for want of a better term, to have consistency across the board in terms of what was taught and how we would be able to measure whether a student was proficient or not for a standard. So when you think of the traditional grading, students might have been given an A or they might have been given 80%. We would not necessarily know how the teacher arrived at that particular grade. With standards-based grading, each standard has a proficiency scale, and so teachers will collect evidence to determine the level of proficiency for the students.
Okay, great. Back to Ms. Hodip. What's the relevance of all of that then? Sorry.
So not a problem. So for the proficiency scales, what social studies has done is provided the teacher essentially a toolbox of sample activities they could do to achieve proficiency.
Okay.
And so, right. And so what we have done, and this gets back to how our conversation began, is we've looked at the cross-curricular nature of social studies. So in the scales, we've looked at how does it connect to English language arts? How does it connect to math? How does it connect to science? Yeah. And so Dr. Simmons is talking about the interviewing. And so that has been a feature in the proficiency scales to have the students interview persons within the school building, to interview living legends, as we put it, to go out and do mini biographies, to do a number of primary and secondary source investigations. And so this is where we're really, really excited about the progress that has come about recently and looking forward to cross-curricular partnerships. So when we talk about the materials that we currently have in social studies, again, we don't want this to be seen as a segmented subject per se. So what are they reading in ELA? You know, are they reading books by Bermudian authors? Are they reading books by African Bermudian authors? Are they reading books by persons who have had experiences that are reflective, Portuguese Bermudians, Native American Bermudians, if you will? So we have to have a renewed call, I'm going to say, to the community. Once again, there's authors out there and amongst us. So the work is going to be valued. And this is where, unfortunately, you would have teachers left to using materials from other countries. Yeah. And so that's why sometimes there are lines that are blurred. But we have used the materials that we have that are developmentally appropriate, because that's really important. You know, we can't take something that's written for a middle school audience and give it to an upper primary school audience, because that's going to compromise the success of that child. Yeah. And so what we do is we do look at the resources that we currently have. And I will just take this opportunity to say there is a space for authors to continue to write, but please consider the audience as well, because the children are very hungry for learning about themselves. And we do the best as educators. I'm going to put back on my teacher hat, because that's where I spent most of my time. We've done a lot of work to have children see themselves reflected in their lessons. However, the community does play a part, the professional community does play a part in the success of us having formal materials to achieve that.
Great. So I'm just going to try to summarize something I think is quite important, right? We do have a scholarship deficit when it comes to Bermuda studies, part of the equation, correct? In terms of there's not a sufficient volume, or maybe not of sufficient quality or range.
All of the above. All of the above. The stories are out there.
Yeah.
The stories out there. We have to devise the ways and means, and you just heard of one of the ways that we're looking to do it internally within the school system.
Yeah.
But we require a renaissance in this country.
Yeah. To
build our own cultural identity and stop crying all the time about what other people are bringing and doing. No, you tell people this is your cultural identity.
Yeah.
You write about it.
Yeah.
Right? You tell your story. I don't care if it's in writing. It has to be on radio. It has to be on television, media. You know, like I said, there's no excuse.
Yeah. Maybe the Royal Gazette will do it.
So let's use the mediums to develop our stories.
Absolutely.
All right. So, Nicole Grant, okay, can you talk, because this is related as well, you know, the partnerships that we have in building these materials, because that this is part of it, isn't it? That if there is a scholarship deficit, then there's a need to create more materials, you know, and I think a big part of the responsibility falls on the department itself. You know, they come into you to be taught. You know, the teachers are looking to you to say, well, where's the materials? You have partnerships. Can you talk a bit about that, Nicole Grant?
We have partnered with two wonderful organizations, one being the National Museum of Bermuda, and they have welcomed us with open arms. Whatever we have basically requested of them, they have jumped on board to deliver. The most recent, like I mentioned earlier, has been the ebook for teachers and students with regard to the transatlantic slave trade. They not only have produced an ebook with the input of Department of Education employees as well as the private sector, but they have extended it by giving webinars to explain what it actually is, as well as receiving feedback from the general community about the actual ebook. They have also created the Prudent Rebels ebook, which is a book that speaks to Bermuda's 1700s to the 1800s, the great history that we have to offer here in Bermuda. It is one that can be used from, I want to say, M1 through to S4. So again, resources are being developed as we speak. We talk about history evolving, and you will see that in these resources, it is definitely history being evolved, as well as exposure to, in some cases, new materials. We have also partnered with Bermuda National Trust. Again, they have done an outstanding job of supporting our public education system. During the closure of schools, they actually presented to the primary 4 and primary 5 students Zoom presentations with regards to 2 of the units for each of those year levels. It was through the 6 weeks that they took students on a wonderful journey with regards to the enslavement of our people, which is one of our units, going right through to emancipation. It also took students on a journey with regards to money and how money was developed, and to present, I want to say, well, not present day, but I think 2009. These community partners are one that we feel, or I should say 2, that we feel will be very instrumental going forward as we do our best to amend the curriculum, knowing that what we have present day is always room for improvement. Again, the word evolving journey that we're taking to ensure that we not only equip them with content, but also contextual understanding, which the partners come in to do that. In some instances, the teachers already do it on a daily basis, but also we want to ensure that we develop critical thinkers. We develop problem solvers. We develop individuals that can actually be proud of who they are by speaking clearly, articulately, and all of that comes through those skills that have been mentioned earlier. So knowing the partnerships that we have formed in the last 6 weeks, we know that going forward we will create more, and that will enable us to feel empowered, i.e. Department of Education, as well as students, as well as teachers, because we have people that are supporting us with social studies.
Would you say these are equal partnerships, or do we just take what they give us because they're offering it?
It's definitely equal partnership throughout throughout the actual closure of schools. Nikisha and I have worked very closely with the organizations. We've had hours of Zoom meetings with them to ensure that what we have is aligned to our scales, which are the proficiency scales, which is a tenet of the Senate-based grading. So it's not a matter of here's a standard or do what you wish. We have worked very closely with them. In most instances, I want to say at least 3 to 4 times a week that we have linked with the individuals at those organizations.
Great. So we're 15 minutes over, but I want to ask one question of Nikisha Hodip, and then we got to address what the audience is saying. And the question really is, can you, and I appreciate that, you know, because teachers come in various varieties in terms of their passion, their interest, and their competence. And we've talked about the performance area and the professional development area. But can you paint a picture of us of sort of like, what is that, you know, what does a lesson look like? You know, what happens in the classroom, you know, as a former teacher yourself? Like, what are some of the things that you can tell us, to give us a glimpse into, you know, what a great teacher or good teacher should be doing? Sorry, put you on the spot there.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm a former teacher. I like to keep my foot in the pond, if you will.
Okay.
And I find that helps with the approach. So again, it's not a top-down but it allows me to work with my colleagues and to experience what they're experiencing to ensure that whatever it is that's created or refined is functional, because that's the important part, sort of like never forget where you come from, but using that to inform practice. And so essentially what we want to do, and teachers are doing this now again through the practice that we have adopted, is you're going to start with looking at a learning intention. What is it that you're here to talk about? But now a rationale. Why are we talking about this? So today we may be looking at the economics, and this is really off the top of my head, so it's definitely not the most ideal learning intention, but we're looking at the economic development of Bermuda in the 1920s. Okay, but why are we learning about this? We're learning about this because we want to see how did the introduction of tourism start to shape Bermuda? So now they're saying, okay, well, I'm learning about an economic system in a particular time period, but zoning in now on a particular industry. Okay, and so then once we go through what we call this is because statement, the rationale, we look at some success criteria. So how do we know that we're understanding the economic development of 1920? So we're going to understand a series of pieces of information that's going to bring us to that. And so the teacher can use inquiry type questions. So Dr. Simmons talked about it's in the questioning. So they may look at photographs, something that we call document-based questions in other levels. So they're looking at pictures. Yeah. And you can have our pictures and say, who do we see in all of these pictures? I see white, wealthy people. Oh, okay. So then who was tourism targeting at that time? They were targeting white, wealthy persons. Okay. And why would that be the case? And so now you're getting, that's why I said there's intersectionality in these conversations. And so you can say, all right, if that be the case, let's look at the types of activities that occurred at that time. So now you're looking at what it is that was being advertised. Where were these persons living? And so there's a myriad of strategies rather, that a teacher would use in order to bring. So it's not telling. You're not the sage on the stage anymore. And I've really appreciated moving. It actually lifts a weight, but it also encourages students to become cultivators of their own knowledge. It remains with them more when they experience. So you might read a little passage and come to a certain understanding through having dialogue with your peers. What is it that you get from this? Give me one word that stands out. Give me a sentence that stands out. So we're looking at best practice strategies, which again are not only social studies. However, it affords the child the ability to be a generator of information, to be a critical thinker, that when you talk about some of the old resources, you can say, okay, well, let's look at this. Whose voice is missing? Who's telling the story? And so, yes, it's old, and you're not going to use it to preach from the pulpit. You're using it to guide their understanding, to say, so if the Portuguese person is absent from this experience, what do you think they would say if they were interviewed at this point in time? If the Native Americans persona is not being reflected, how do you think that could be reflected? Or what does the absence of the Black person, the African Bermudian, the Caribbean experience say about this particular time period? So when we talk about teaching practices today, that's what we're looking at: the questioning, the critical analysis, the examination of primary and secondary resources, the collaboration for children to be able to draw conclusions about the validity in the movement, So I just want to say, we could go to the women's suffrage movement. It excluded people. We talk about that. So although women won the right to vote, it wasn't comprehensive. Universal. And so therefore, when you're looking at pedagogies, that's what I've used. That's what some of my colleagues use. And so that's the practice that, again, we're evolving. And so we've got a lot going on. I'm sorry, I'm just excited.
It shows. I mean, can I also say, sorry, last question before we go back to the audience, okay? Sorry, audience. The term Black Studies has been used a lot throughout our history. Friends of ours, who I'm sure friends of yours as well, you know, when they were in Berkeley, there was a student movement for demanding black studies.
69, I think that
Sorry?
was. I think
Who?
that was either 68, 69.
Yeah,
Around that time, yeah.
in the 60s, you know, there was a research, you know, very active period, you know, even throughout the 70s, you know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that term? Because I notice it's not used in this context, you know, it's Bermuda and global studies. So somebody could legitimately say there is no black studies in public education system. Any thoughts about that?
I have lots of thoughts about it.
All right,
And,
you got a minute, Doc.
okay, then we don't have enough time. But we have studies in our curriculum.
Yeah.
We have it. Usually, you know, when people are talking Black studies, and most of it actually is framed within an African American context. Right. Right. And I'll speak to that is while it has importance, we're moving beyond that. Okay. And it's in the Bermudian context. So if we're talking in the Bermudian context of Black studies, and you heard about it earlier, you know, when Hodip was speaking to and using the Tucker's Town as a frame of reference. Mm-hmm. Well, that's part of Bermuda Black studies. When you talk about 2/3 of the Somerset community, for example, can directly make their linkage to, or their ancestral linkage to St. Kitts and Nevis. Yeah. And the whole dockyard development, right? That's Black studies. Right. When you talk about what we were speaking to earlier in terms of the importance of our children knowing who our people, Black, white, Portuguese, whomever, right? And by the way, that's Black studies. Okay, so when you talk about ancestral relations in Bermuda, ancestral relations which crosses many racial lines in Bermuda, ethnicity lines in Bermuda, that is Black studies. That's why I was saying earlier, we always got to begin with our children first, who they are, where they are, going out to the world, the global aspect of who we are, and bringing them back. Right. That's Black studies. So now, yeah. So the content is that. We can talk about the legacies and of our kings and queens coming out of Africa and so forth. But I'll tell you this here. If I look at my African lineage, I can trace where those kings and queens are in my history. Those are the type of things that we want to bring to our children's learning going forward. And I'll quickly say this here, and I'll bring her name up, Dr. Karika Weldon. You know, one of her projects, since she's been working with us in the department for the last 5-6 years, is to do exactly that. She has some of the children on board doing it in terms of swabbing and getting their ancestral history. You imagine we had the courage, and it's private, but you had the courage to every child, you do your swab and find out what your ancestral lineage is to the African continent. I'll tell you what, in a year, you'll then see children walking with their chest up and speaking to, oh, I'm Igbo, I'm Yoruba, my people of Nigeria. They'll understand those things. Our continent is a great continent. Oh, I'm telling you, of course. Sorry, we were joking on it. We were joking around before. If we're telling our children, and its proof is there, all humanity goes back to the continent. Yeah. Has its beginning in the continent. Okay, right? So we know this. That's no secret. So why not begin with our children first? My Bermudian children, this is who you are going out. Why not have that in our curriculum? Not why, it's coming. It's here. Coming. Okay. But we gotta be patient. Right. Our people are nervous, number one of that. Yeah. We're gonna so I was actually trying to ask about the use of that term Black studies. Okay, what are the different approaches? I mean, it clearly seems to me that you're taking a sort of integrative approach, you know, in terms of
You know, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're teaching or studying Bermuda history and culture, we're also teaching and studying, you know, the history and culture of black people, you know, as a through line through that
Of
history of
course.
culture. Correct? Is that
The,
accurate?
the danger is this here, and I'm sorry, colleagues, what we have to be careful of with Black studies, and this is something that has been learned and taught by my mentors, because we've been conditioned to have more of an African American perspective to Black
Yeah.
studies.
Yeah.
Okay? And I love that history. I love it. But again, who are you in it?
Mm-hmm.
Who are your heroes?
Yeah.
Huh?
All right.
See, our kids are so we're so adept to naming heroes in other places and spaces. Malcolm, Martin, all of the above, right? We can do that. Who are your heroes?
Yeah.
But we do identify our heroes throughout the curriculum.
Yeah, we identify, we do not celebrate. And I'm not talking about that thing that we do on Heroes Day.
No.
Right? I'm talking about where it's embedded in your psyche, where your children understand that same nationalism that African Americans have if they're heroes, that Jamaicans have if they're heroes. Where are ours? Do we embrace and hold the recent Muzumbo?
I'll tell you what, Doc.
These are the things that we're talking
Can I
about.
just say who my hero is?
Please.
He was the greatest man. He was my dad.
There you go.
And he was the greatest man that ever lived. All right.
Absolutely.
One day you might come to agree, but I'm going to come to this.
But you said it. I mean, this is a man who worked with Kwame Nkrumah.
Yeah, and a lot more too. But anyway, so I'm going to come to this audience question. Here's something that came up a while ago.
Yeah.
Does it mean that we will move towards taking a culturally affirmative approach to formally and informally measuring our children's ability? Talk about that, testing, because we do this thing called checkpoints, right? Okay. Is that considered culturally sort of affirmative, or is it sort of an instrumental thing? And what do you understand by that question anyway? Mrs. Richards?
Well, let me begin. I'll just make a general comment, but I would like to have Officer Grant just share a little bit about the assessment and the type of assessments for children. So the checkpoint is based on the Cambridge curriculum. There will be opportunities for teachers, English, math, and science. And so the social studies curriculum is based on Bermuda and global studies. So even if I'm a teacher teaching a curriculum that is linked with Cambridge, I still have an opportunity on an ongoing basis. I have an opportunity, but I also have a responsibility to ensure that what children are learning is culturally relevant. And so I bring in the context and the content that relates to Bermuda. So even with the Cambridge curricula. But as it relates to the assessments, let me let Officer Grant share a bit about the types of assessments that are administered to our students in social studies.
Yes.
So with regards to assessments, we have at the front line with the teachers, they have assessments that we identify as formative assessments, which means they actually create those assessments on a daily basis to check for understanding with regards to what the children are learning during that particular class. Or it could be one that is more of a exit card where they're moving out of the classroom. Before they move, they determine what is it that they're learning. So there are different types of assessments that are actually administered by teachers. At the department level, because of the center-based grading, we have moved into what we call common assessments. And basically, Ms. Hodip and I are in the process of developing this with the input of teachers, which means that we will be having conversations with teachers and principals in the near future about what the assessments will look like and who actually will be developing those assessments. So at this present date, with regards to assessment and making them culturally relevant, the culturally relevant piece should always be a part of the delivery of instruction. We hope that with the innovative unit, which is a group that, as I think most know from overseas, working with the department, we will be able to develop a more effective way, I guess, that speaks to cultural relevance with new learning in the next few years to determine what that actually looks like for our young people.
That's the innovation unit. I think is really, really important. Sorry, we keep going on, but that Mrs. Richards to explain a little bit what that process is all about with the innovation, that partnership with them. Do you mind doing that?
Sure. Innovation Unit is an overseas organization working collaboratively with the Department of Education as we engage in this journey for transforming the Bermuda public school system. We have worked together to step out a roadmap, and that roadmap will include 16 key elements. One of those elements, of course, would be involving new curricula. Another would be new pedagogies. So part of this transformative process will involve analyzing and examining our current curricula to determine whether it really does meet our needs and will enable our children to successfully transition from level to level and ultimately to university and the global platform.
Great. So there's a very positive comments about the professional development. The orientation. Melissa Gibbons Tankard said she learned a lot even as a returning Bermudian when the orientation was done with her in 1989. So obviously that was a long time ago.
But it still takes place as new staff come into the system.
You still do
The
it.
orientation program has a component where we have an individual come and she talks about the Bermudian culture, how to interact with Bermudians, etc. So it's deemed very important, and it is a part of the orientation program.
Kimwana Eve, let's be honest, they may be black, but are they living an African center lifestyle, and we continue to teach a European curriculum? I don't know when you came, Kimwana, to watch this broadcast, but you might want to replay it. Watch the replay, and get hold of us if you still think that we're teaching a European curriculum. All right. The next one would be Karen Edwards Simmons. Oh, that's an interesting question. Is the ministry in the department for all students in public and private schools? If the answer is yes, then is the social studies curriculum being spoken about, being taught across all schools? How does it work? Does a ministry impose standards, those kinds of standards across whether it's private or public?
No, that's and I understand the context of that question, which is a good question.
Yes.
What that question raises is something that we will be looking to in the future. Now, this is the responsibility of the Ministry of Education.
Yeah.
Because it's overseeing education of the entire island.
Yeah.
If you want to reflect, there was a time of the BSSC era from 74 to when? 80 something. Well, yeah. It ended in 96, really, 97.
Yeah.
But especially between 74 to the 80s especially, all schools did the same exit examination, public and private.
Yes.
Public and private. So in the context of that question, it was imperative that all the schools, when they did the examination, had to know some of the same curricula.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all had to do the same national exit examination, right? And this was the BSSC was internationally, globally recognized as our certifiable graduation requirements.
So there's been a bit of a splintering.
The Ministry of Education can set that tone. It did in the past, and maybe, I mean, Ms. Richards knows that it's a discussion that's going on right now as we talk about the school redesigning.
Right. So, well, we won't get into that. I mean, so there's been a bit of a splintering where private schools are doing what they want, basically, correct? And is there any alignment at all between the private and public sectors?
No.
All right.
Really.
So moving right along, Carmen Mitchell-Jones. History is nothing more than the point of the person who wrote the book. We have to think critically. Other subjects can incorporate Bermudan history into the subjects. That relates to the point about the quality of our materials. You know, I'm not. Yeah. I mean, it's a good point for a lot of our materials. You know, it's a perspective. You know, I've read a lot of the Bermuda stuff, and some are memoirs. Some are things that were written by, I don't know, former premiers who wanted to leave, you know, leave a good PR behind, but they wrote it
Well,
themselves.
let me take part of her example because I know which Carmen is going with this here. You take art, which is a field that's, you know, area that she's been a part of. We don't have many books written by our artists, but there's no shortage of their artwork. There's no shortage of their artwork.
Right.
I can tell you, even in the Department of Education, we have an award-winning artist and literary person in Dr. Shangri-La Dorm Thompson. Not that many people know it. You know, her works are recognized internationally.
Yeah.
Her written works,
Yeah.
children's books, her plays are recognized internationally. But again, we do not project enough of what our people do, not just Dr. Shangri-La. You know, Pat Pogson is a lot of our people's work.
Absolutely.
So there's no shortage. We may not have the book, but we have the evidence of their work.
Yes, yes.
And I think these are the things, and they sometimes become the resources. I say also what we do in social studies, and Keisha and Nicole, you can attest to this here or critique it. We do rely a lot on the oral language of our people. We bring them to our classrooms. We bring them to our children are introduced to people. The sad thing about it, like I said, they're forgotten. They are forgotten, and they may write something, a story that's a part of, you know, Ms. Hodip's class or some other teacher's class. But we need to begin to write and collect and tell the stories. And our children can become publishers and authors right out of the classroom. That's what we need to do.
You know what?
It's been done, and we need to do more
exactly.
of that.
More of it is needed.
My company, Think Media, has been trying to push this for a long time, and if it's going to happen in education, you know, I'm totally supportive personally. You know, if that's where we want to go, you know, document our history and get our kids involved. You know, I've got the equipment, the lights, the mics, the cameras, everything to get started. You know, I'm not going to do it for the government. So, you know, there's got to be resources, you know, put into it.
We have the people.
Thank you, Shantae.
I'm very vocal about it. They're all sitting around in this panel, and they're all out there. What we need to do is value our people.
Yeah.
Value. And sit down and have a conversation with your people.
Here's a vote of
That's what we need to do.
Yes, here's a vote of confidence from one of our listeners.
Oh, okay.
And this would have been one of my objectives for this kind of activity. That, you know, we get people understanding, you know, on the same page as far as here's where we are, you know, get an accurate reflection of what's going on, you know, and then together we move forward as a community. There's still going to be people, you know, who have questions and disagreements and critiques, as they should, but we're now moving, and we're now moving roughly, you know, we know we're moving in the same direction, as opposed to the kind of political football that has been going on all these years. But let me get through this. Somebody says here, cross-curriculum is spoken about, but was never a true reality when I was in education. If curricula is not developed in collaboration related to other subjects, it will continue to be a moot point. Okay, so I'm trying to digest that.
Well, another person is correct. I mean, in terms of developing curricula and cross-curricula or interdisciplinary curricula, I mean, hey, why not mathematics with science and science with mathematics and language arts with social studies and vice versa? You know, cross-curricular.
I think
but with it also comes the pedagogy. You see, it's not so much just the content. It's the pedagogy. It's the teaching strategies. Those things. It's the
Yeah.
critical thought process that comes with that.
I think what has happened is there are teachers who will automatically teach that way because it is part of their philosophy.
Mm.
They will integrate the curricular, they will make it culturally relevant. And I think what Mrs. Edwards Simmons might be saying is that in order to make that happen on a day-to-day basis, when the curricula are being developed, those connections will
Yeah.
actually be integrated into the curriculum. And so we stand more of a chance of that integrated approach taking place rather than leaving it up to the individual to determine, do I make those connections or not?
Okay, Ms.
Let me
Richards,
ask this question of my teachers on the panel. Keisha, starting first. What percentage of our primary school teachers teach in an integrated way?
she's
In
not
an
going to want to answer
interdisciplinary
that question.
cross-cultural way on your observation. Percentage. We're having dialogue. You ain't calling out our people. This is on our observations. What percentage you think?
I think ideally what Nikisha was trying to say is that that's how we are setting up our proficiency scales.
Yes.
So we are directing them, encouraging them to actually do the interdisciplinary teaching by giving them example activities. So they do not have to necessarily think about the connection. It's already there in black and white to support their delivery of instruction. So as far as what Ms. Edwards Simmons is saying, there are, and you mentioned, Dr. Simmons, there are different pedagogies. It depends on the actual individual teacher and how they teach, which they deem best for their students going forward. There are many different pedagogies with regards to education. Interdisciplinary teaching is one of them to reach students so that they can transfer the information from one level to the next. And we can talk about historical thinking. We can talk about many things during this discussion. But ideally, what we have done for social studies, especially for the primary level, we have actually outlined for term 1, 2020-2021, from P1 to P6, we've outlined for the most part how the teachers can connect the other subjects with social studies. As Nikisha mentioned, we are just as important, and we are the backbone basically to the other subjects for the most part with regards to pride and nationality. And so we are hoping that when they are teaching the other subjects, they will use those sample activities as they go forward.
What I can add to that is, and so I don't know the tier that Ms. Edwards Simmons was making reference to. At the primary level, cross-curricular is developmentally appropriate. It reinforces what teachers teach in other subjects. And so I can say as promoted. I will also say that looking at different jurisdictions' curricula, there are made mention of cross-curricular connections, but it doesn't do it, I think, to the extent that she was speaking. So I think it's an appreciation of how curriculum documents are written as a general practice. And so teachers' college preparation, professional development is going to encourage cross-curricular connections. Now, Ms. Grant will be able to speak better to the middle and high, but what I can appreciate is that they are experts of their particular subject area, different to the primary school leader who's pretty much a jack of all trades. And so we see those connections because we do it every day. So even the newest teacher is going to come out and she's going to say, okay, I'm teaching science. Oh, I see this particular skill that's going to be developed by my math lesson. And so over time, she's going to hone that craft and become really, really tight on how she does that. And so I do want to say at the primary level, it is more of a practice than not. I can't put a number on it, but I do know that professional development has spoken to it. There are resources that encourage it. And so therefore, it is something that is definitely reflected in a number of teachers' practice. And so this is a continuing conversation that we continue to encourage cross-curricular connections. And as Ms. Grant said, we have taken the initiative to make it explicit. So it is very clear for our teachers. But again, that's a part of us being very supportive and helping teachers to hone their craft.
Yeah, so we've got some comments about validating the comments about the live interaction with members of the community, you know, doing those interviews and stuff. Here's another one from Julie Murdoch. Oh, she mentions you, Miss Grant. Students, can you read that?
Can you enlarge it, please?
Yeah. Can you read it now? She said you worked with the ELA teacher. The students love seeing that you can connect what they learn into other subjects and bring them to life. So that's, you know,
Yeah.
that's
That's
just
an
validated
example.
exactly what
That's-
you've said. Yeah.
Good
Yes.
example.
Yeah. Even business studies, most recently they met virtually to discuss COVID-19 impact on Bermudan entrepreneurs. Yeah. So is this happening enough? Do you have a sense that we've arrived, or is there much more work to be done to embed these practices within within the whole system? Mrs. Richards,
Well,
what do you
it's
think?
about practice. It's
Well,
about
what I would underscore here and what I would want the community to understand is the department's commitment to improvement. And so as we continue to look at our curricula and, you know, determine whether they are meeting our needs, if they are not, we will continue to review, evolve. That's a critical part of what we are doing. And so if decisions are made to formalize that approach, then in order for it to happen, it has to actually happen with the documents. But part of that, I'm going to loop back to the role of the principal as instructional leader. We can have the curriculum documents, we can have them set up so that we see, you know, the cross-curricular connections with other subjects. But we can't just assume that that's going to be the delivery. And so we do have to go into the classroom. The officer has to go in, the principal has to go in to determine and to monitor what is taking place.
Yeah.
To ensure that it's happening.
Okay, Latoya Shelton says we're still a colony. That's why we do not have black studies.
well, we said earlier. Just she may have missed the earlier discussion.
May not have been
Yeah.
at the beginning.
Decolonizing the school curriculum.
Yes.
You have to decolonize the school curriculum. You can have as many black studies. You know, black Americans are not colonized, but live in a very colonized mindset. So you can have black studies and still be colonized right here. So we're talking about also going forward and decolonizing school curriculum.
Nikisha, hold it. Talk about, 'cause I think you have a bit of an academic background in this whole area, don't you?
Pardon me?
I do, but that's not where I was going to go with
Okay,
it.
well, where are you going? Go on.
I appreciate the comment. However, I would sort of come back with the question of, do the Caribbean countries have black studies? And so looking at the Jamaican curriculum most recently, I do not see black studies. However, the black studies is infused, if you will, and they have a higher percentage, but they have the parallel history that we have. So, you know, does Africa have black studies? And I'm going to say at the primary and secondary level, because I do believe that there is a place for black studies at the tertiary level, regardless of the location of the institution. But again, are we truly believing that there's a need to segment history? You know, and so this is, you know, there was a comment that was made earlier, and so my experience at a tertiary level is: do we want to divide the continent? We're looking for the continent to come together. So when we talk about nation building, are we going to tell the story of the nation and its citizens in order to build a healthy nation, or are we going to build a decompartmentalized mindset early? We want to present a balanced story, not his story, not her story, a balanced story of history as we know it until it is proven differently. And so I believe that when I'm at the front of my classroom and I'm teaching about emancipation, I'm teaching about emancipation, so the experience of the enslaved person that was brought from Africa, because that's where we start. We start as to say, where did they come from? Where did these enslaved people come from? So they know they came from a place called Africa, and you can get very specific, Gold Coast, Angola, you can do that, right? They came through the Caribbean, which is why we have our Caribbean connections, economic connections, our political connections, historically within the European context. We're having those conversations at primary 5. So do I have to have a separate subject called Black Studies when that unit has traced my people from Africa to the Caribbean, where the other half of my family is from, and moving into Bermuda, where I currently, my children, I'm a mother, a proud mother of 5, and where they reside. So they understand from P2, where we talk about the origins, to P3, where we talk about the traditions, to P4, where we start to understand that there's some political involvement going on here, where they're bringing these people in, Nathaniel Butler called as instruments, yeah, where we're brought in for the labor force to P5. Now we're really talking about that experience. Do we need Black Studies to segment it? Because I've just brought my children through the Middle Passage. I've just brought my children through the experience of the slave. I've just brought my students through understanding how we even got to have the African Bermudian population as it stands today, where we can say, I am a Black Bermudian. Do I need a separate subject to do it? Because I just did it within the context of social studies at the primary level. So that would be my question. Is it truly necessary at this level?
Okay, we did have a survey with questions that were sent in advance. People did send some questions in. I haven't looked at it since this morning though. So, but I do think we've covered what I saw this morning. Does anybody think there's any question that we didn't cover?
There were some questions that came that related to the reopening of school, and then they will be addressed through the town hall sessions that will be take place for each of the year levels. But in terms of the questions that were sent in, I think for the most part we have addressed those this afternoon.
There was one about the environment, and I just want to go back to social studies.
Yeah.
At the end of it, we're cultivating historians, we're cultivating geographers, we're cultivating economists, we're cultivating political scientists, and we're cultivating environmentalists. So we look at conservation, we look at preservation, we look at sustainability, we look at the impact of man on the endemic species of Bermuda since the beginning, yeah, with the increase. So again, we can have all of these conversations at the primary level in these modules, and we say, why are we having this conversation? Because right now you're a historian and we're looking at history. Right now you're an economist and we're understanding how economies are built and how they develop. Why are we having this conversation? Because you're a geographer and you're going to understand where we are geographically in position to others. And Ms. Grant talked about physical geography, human geography. We have those conversations. Yeah. And so there was a question that talked about the environment. And I do want to assure that person that sent in that question that yes, we do talk about the environment, again, from the perspective.
Yeah.
Grant said earlier, natural and man-made environments and things along those lines, because we do want to cultivate our environmentalists to protect Bermuda. If we don't cultivate those persons, we won't have a country to live on and talk about.
This is a good segue into a question that was put on the screen very briefly, Mr. Johnson, that spoke to the immersion of education. And basically at all levels, it is encouraged. In actual fact, in 2018, there was a field trip document that was developed by teachers that was aligned to every standard at the primary level, which allows for teachers to expose students by immersing them into doors outside of the classroom that speaks to the standards that are being delivered within the classroom. So it's up to the actual teacher to organize how they can actually immerse students into the aspects that we offer in the community. At the middle level, it's the same thing. At senior level, there are various examples, one being that I mentioned earlier, the African Diaspora Heritage Trail. Students were immersed, they were elated. Their questions were, where has this been? Because it was a first for them. It was, I believe, 2 years ago that was first introduced to them as far as the exposure to the field trip. So they do have the opportunity. It's up to the individual in the building to ensure that it does happen and it's executed.
Art is a text, Roselva Severin.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. That's absolutely an excellent resource.
Yeah. Another comment here, cultural relevance in the curriculum is very important. If we take culture out of the curriculum, then we're robbing our people of their true identity. Can any of you talk about mapping social studies to mathematics? Because this is where we, the cross-cultural curricular sort of approach. Dr. Simmons, do you relate to that? How can social studies be?
And that's very much an African-centered perspective. I mean, as a former social studies teacher, one of the things I used to do was to integrate and show, especially Imhotep, as someone in medicine and mathematics, the theorems and so forth of how it was connected to mathematics, but also sharing with students mathematicians, from a historical perspective, and you're talking Black studies and so forth, sharing who some of those mathematicians are based upon some of the mathematical problems that we may be discussing in a classroom, and just giving students that frame of reference that this mathematician helped to shape Pythagorean theorem, when you're talking Imhotep, for example. So there, like I said, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward all research and across all disciplines. So you can integrate history, social studies into all disciplines. So many people think that, because I teach mathematics, I'm just here in teaching mathematics. But you can show students who some of the luminaries are in mathematics, if you're a mathematics teacher.
Yeah. Okay, there's a comment here. I think she's referring to when we went through the slides, the curriculum, what's actually being taught. In senior school, the Introduction to Africa piece, is that where you learn about the pre-enslavement era?
The pre-enslavement era is introduced in M2, as well as an elective for introduction to Africa. So it's not mandatory.
All right, so she's saying we need to start way before slavery.
Of course.
But we do.
And we do start way before slavery.
Okay.
As mentioned earlier in the presentation.
Now, I've kept you away from other work, so this is the final comment. Now, I'm going to say something, right, Miss Eve? The whole point of this type of community conversation is not to engage in personal sort of criticisms of people. It's to try to get into constructive criticism about the work that we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
People make personal decisions about their lives, right? I'm not putting these people up here to be attacked by you or anybody else, right? This is a conversation about the actual work that they are doing. But if anybody wants to take that, feel free.
I can't really see the comments, so
I'll start.
Yeah.
I have, as I mentioned, 5 children. They are all in the public school system. They have gone through the public school system. However, what I would like to remind us is that Bermuda has had a very fluid public school system in the past as well. And so I was a public school educated student. One of the schools that I have attended has since decided to go private. That was the choice that the institution made. I cannot claim to be a privately educated student. I am a public school student. I want to remind us of our history that there's a school that was private that has continued to remain public when they made that choice to be a public school. They're aided actually in this at this time. And so I think we have to be very mindful of the fluidity of our public-private sector, that there are some schools that were private in the past and they're public or aided in the present, and some that were public in the past and returned to a private status. The choice that I made to have my children in public schools is not based upon any other element except it was a personal choice. I can say that when I was overseas, I chose not to put my son in a public school. I did put him in a home school. I think parents are going to do what they believe is best for their child and what meets the needs of their child. But I will say whether your child goes to a public or private school, then we're looking at social studies, and someone brought this up earlier. There is a need for both public and private to ensure that these children are leaving with the skills that the content that we are exposing the children to. And so what I would say to any parent who has their child in private school, if you're hearing this conversation and you're not seeing these elements reflected in that institution that you chose for whatever reason, advocate and say, this is what's being taught in the public system. I'm supporting what's being taught in the public system. I've made a choice to have my child in this institution, and I would like to see these elements. So when we talk about cultural relevance, you hear the commitment that has been made here. And so therefore, if that commitment is not reflected in that institution, I'm going to encourage the parent to have that conversation with the persons at that institution, because I do believe that people make choices for whatever reasons work for them and their child's needs, and that has to be respected.
So, Mrs. Richards, talk about parents' advocacy. What's your perspective on that? For the public system. I mean, we deal with parents all the time. We talk about we get their complaints, compliments. We get all sorts of varied, and oftentimes when I acknowledge a report, I always say to them, do not ever give up your right to be an advocate for your child.
Absolutely. In fact, the system will depend on parents to help it to get better. Schools need to depend on parents to help them to get better. And so parents need to understand the key role that they play as an advocate for their child within a school structure and system, but also an advocate to help the actual school and the system to become better. There are parents who may engage in conversations on Facebook or with their friends, etc. And a lot of times that information may not reach us. I mean, we've set up the BPSS feedback form so that parents can send in criticisms, concerns, any positives, etc. So I don't want parents to ever underestimate the power that they have as it relates to advocacy and the impact that it can have in helping us to become better at what we do. It makes no sense to complain about something to someone. I believe that if you do want to see change, then you have to keep pushing and you have to keep bringing it forward. But parent advocacy and engagement with parents is critical for us as a system. Just in terms of what we're doing now, working to improve the communication, trying to get the two-way communication in place, and that engagement is because we recognize that our parents and our community stakeholders bring to the table valuable insights and feedback that we can use to help us to get better at what we do for Bermuda's children.
Great. Okay, so we're 2 hours in. Oh, Mr. Grant.
Yes, we are. We're 2 hours in.
Yes, so I have a parent, and we're talking about parents.
Yeah.
I have a parent who I'm meeting with, so I'm 5 minutes late in meeting with this parent. But we set out to say that, you know what, there's been a renewed interest in, Black studies or what's happening with social studies on the island. We wanted to give some insights, to share information. And I
Yeah.
hope that we have done that. And I would invite those who have tuned in to the conversation today to let us know whether we achieved that. Did you learn something different? Did you learn something new? Let us know. If you have any recommendations, let us know that as well. And as Mr. Johnson said, we're going to be continuing with this. This is not just a once off. We want to continue, and we want to make this a series. And so we hope that your time with us today has been time well spent.
Anybody else final words?
I would just like to share with regards to Dr. Simmons mentioned earlier about, I think the question was asked about private and public schools, and he said that basically, I think in so many words, the interaction with them may not be there. But I know for the past 5 years, even before my time as officer, we have had the interactions with the private schools because we want to ensure that we are learning from each other, number one, and whatever is happening over here on our side in the public school, that the private school is also aware of the new findings that we are coming encountered with. In the last 2 years since I've been in the position, I've met with 2 of the private schools here on island. The public may not know, but both schools, one in particular, is moving forward with regards to Bermuda studies at the middle level. And so it is important that the communication continues to be open, because we have individuals there that represent different groups of people, different races. And it is imperative that we continue to keep those lines of communication open to ensure that as a country, we have as many people as we can, i.e. students, that can get involved and educate themselves and embrace our culture and traditions. So like Mrs. Richards said, we have to ensure that parents, teachers, students on the island are involved with what we're doing here at the department, whether it be private or public.
Wonderful. Dr. Simmons.
No, well, I was speaking to earlier in terms of the Ministry of Education. I know our teachers do, public and private, they do engage each other. My statement is mainly to the Ministry of Education.
It was about alignments.
Right. Yeah. But no, I know we this has been great. This has been beautiful. It's a start, and we need to encourage more of not just the practical, it's the intellectual discussion around these things. People need to hear Bermuda educators' ideas, Bermudian educators, practical applications to what they do daily. There's not enough of that occurs. So I think this is very important and it's very good. I know that there are some disappointed people out there today because they could not access, and they don't do Facebook, nor do I. But
I'll fix it.
Hopefully we can revise and do some things maybe a little differently to engage and include them in. So, like we said, it's the first time, and we'll iron out the kinks like we'll get better. We'll get better. So,
we will.
Well, I will say, do you want to say a final word, Mrs. Richards? Or Miss
No, I shared my final comment and asked people to just let us know whether they learned something different, or whether they felt this was valuable for them. Please let us know.
Mrs. Hodip?
Just in the same vein, I just want to repeat and emphasize social studies is a crucial subject, and whether people have not agreed with everything that has been shared with, I think that even in disagreements, we can appreciate that's exactly what history is founded upon, disagreements. Exactly. And that's what it's all about. And so I want us to see this opportunity as the beginning of parents, I'm getting back to it, communities and community partners coming together for the benefit of our children and to invest in what is taught in the classroom. I'm getting back to the fact that it's there in black and white. I've seen it for the last 12 years, and I'm very honored to be a part of the process that can bring social studies even closer to the forefront and to support teachers, because I do understand. That's why I stated I like to keep one foot in the classroom. I will not be hypocritical. I will stand in front of the classroom and deliver lessons and support my colleagues through the process and help parents to understand what it is that their children have been exposed to. So just that continued call for partnership, and I look forward to future conversations.
Thanks a lot. On that note, I'm going to have to like say the final words here. So yes, this will be streamed on YouTube. Well, replayed on YouTube as well as the Facebook page that we're on now. We decided to do it just to Facebook because like, well, to be honest, I couldn't figure out how to do the simultaneous thing quickly enough to have it on YouTube at the same time. So it's going to be uploaded before the weekend is even over, so others can watch it then. Please tell your friends and family and the kings and queens in your lives. And I hope the audience realizes that what you've just witnessed is actually an unprecedented effort to engage our community in a way that's more authentic than real. Some people prefer to have, the political football going on. It's still going to be there. You can go and read the Royal Gazette or any other media. They're experts in quoting people. But if you want to hear it from so-called the horse's mouth, this is the first time you've actually, I think, we've had a kind of public discussion like this with the people who are actually on the ground making it happen. Tell us what you think. Tell us what we should be doing next when the new school year starts. We're going to focus more now on the safety and health piece before school reopens. But you can always get in touch. There's a Facebook page. If you're a parent, there's a Facebook group you can get into and have that conversation. So on that note, you all enjoy the rest of your Friday afternoon. Take care.
Thank